The year was 1914. The world stood at a crossroads. In Europe, political tensions simmered, soon to erupt into the flames of the First World War. But in the farthest reaches of the globe, men like Sir Ernest Shackleton were consumed by a different fire, one of adventure, ambition, and the lure of the unknown. For centuries, the South Pole had remained one of the last unclaimed prizes on Earth. The age of exploration had seen towering peaks conquered, vast oceans charted, and jungles penetrated. But Antarctica, a frozen wilderness at the bottom of the world, still guarded its secrets. 2 years earlier, Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen had beaten Shackleton's rival, Robert Falcon Scott, in the race to the South Pole. Scott and his team had perished on the return journey. The pole itself had been claimed. Yet Shackleton believed there was one feat left that could make history: crossing the entire continent of Antarctica on foot. His plan was audacious: land on the Weddell Sea, march first 800 miles across the pole to the Ross Sea on the other side. It was to be called the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition. Viewer discretion is advised. This story contains accounts of extreme cold, starvation, isolation, and life-or-death struggles that some viewers may find disturbing. Ernest Shackleton was no stranger to the ice. He had sailed with Robert Falcon Scott on the Discovery expedition in 1901, turning back only 97 miles from the pole. In 1907, he had led his own team on the Nimrod expedition, reaching within 97 miles again before retreating to save his men from certain death. He was courageous, ambitious, and determined not to fail a third time. In 1913, as whispers of war filled Europe's air, Shackleton announced his plans for the greatest Antarctic journey ever attempted. The press loved him. The public was captivated. Donations poured in from wealthy patrons, scientific societies, and even the British government. One newspaper declared, "No man can fail in such an enterprise if Shackleton leads." Shackleton began recruiting his crew in early 1914. The way men applied became the stuff of legend. According to lore, Shackleton placed an ad in the London Times. Men wanted for hazardous journey. Small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success. Whether or not the ad truly existed has been debated, but one thing is certain: over 5,000 men applied. Shackleton chose just 28. Some may think I need scientists, navigators, skilled men only, but character matters more than skill. A man with cheerfulness and courage can keep others alive when hope grows thin. Among them were seasoned sailors, a carpenter, a photographer named Frank Hurley who would immortalize the journey on film, and even a stowaway, Perce Blackborough, a young Welshman who smuggled himself aboard and later earned his place among the crew. Shackleton acquired a specially built ship from Norway, a 3-masted barquentine named Polaris. He renamed her Endurance after his family motto, "By endurance we conquer." The Endurance was 144 feet long, reinforced with thick oak planks for the ice, and powered by both sails and a coal engine. She was perhaps the sturdiest wooden ship ever built for polar exploration. "She'll hold fast in the pack ice, sir, strong as any ship afloat." But no amount of timber or steel could match the crushing power of the Antarctic ice. On August 1, 1914, as the Endurance prepared to sail, news arrived. Britain was at war with Germany. Shackleton offered to place his ship and crew at the disposal of the Admiralty. But the response from the First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill, was brief. Proceed. The expedition would go on. On August 8, the Endurance sailed from Plymouth, bound first for Buenos Aires, then the whaling stations of South Georgia before the ice. The weeks that followed were filled with work and anticipation. The men trained sled dogs, practiced survival drills, and prepared for the unknown. Frank Hurley, the photographer, captured it all: sailors aloft in the rigging, dogs racing across the deck, the Endurance cutting through stormy seas. "I mean to photograph everything: the ice, the ship, the men. Even if the sea swallows us, these images will outlive us all." Among the crew, spirits were high. They sang shanties, told stories below deck, and placed bets on when they'd first sight the Antarctic ice. On November 5, 1914, after 3 months at sea, Endurance reached the remote whaling stations of South Georgia Island in the South Atlantic. The Norwegian whalers there warned Shackleton of heavy pack ice clogging the Weddell Sea. It might be wise, they suggested, to wait until next season. "The ice this year she is worse than we have seen in decades, Captain. Many ships have turned back." But Shackleton, driven by ambition and perhaps fate itself, decided to press on. After a month of repairs and resupplying, Endurance sailed south into the unknown. The men of the Endurance didn't know it yet, but they were sailing not toward glory, but toward one of the most grueling survival epics in history. Ahead lay ice, isolation, and a test of human courage so severe that more than a century later, their story would still haunt the world's imagination. December 1914. The Endurance plowed southward, her bow cutting through bitter seas as the last signs of civilization vanished over the horizon. Behind them, the whaling station at South Georgia grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely. Ahead lay nothing but wind, water, and ice. The men laughed, sang, and played with the sled dogs, not knowing that each mile carried them closer to disaster. By early December, the temperature dropped sharply. The first icebergs appeared on the horizon, silent, jagged towers drifting through the waves like frozen ghosts. Never seen anything like it. One moment it's clear, next thing you know, a mountain of ice looms up out of the fog, makes a man feel small. As the days passed, the ice thickened. Loose floes knocked against the Endurance's hull with hollow thuds. Shackleton studied his charts and the weather, pushing the ship deeper into the frozen sea. Despite the bitter cold, the crew celebrated Christmas at sea. They decorated the mess with scraps of ribbon, sang carols, and cooked a feast from their dwindling stores. Roast seal meat, tinned vegetables, and even a small pudding Frank Hurley managed to bake. "Gentlemen, here's to the success of the Imperial Trans-Antarctic expedition, and may the ice give us safe passage." The men cheered, mugs of cocoa raised high. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing. On January 10, 1915, Endurance entered the pack ice proper, a chaotic, shifting world of frozen floes grinding against one another. The ship zigzagged through narrow leads of open water, the crew watching as the passageways closed behind them like a trap. "She's handling well for now, sir. But this ice, it moves like a living beast. We'll have to stay sharp." For days, they threaded the needle, dodging floes and ice ridges, inching closer to the Antarctic continent. Then, on January 18th, everything changed. At 76 degrees 34 S, 31 degrees 30 feet W, the ice closed in completely. The Endurance shuddered to a halt, locked fast in a frozen vise. The crew tried breaking the ice with poles, even driving the ship's engine full steam ahead, but the floes refused to yield. "She won't budge, sir. We're stuck." "Then we wait. The ice must break sometime." They didn't know it yet, but the ship would never sail freely again. Days turned to weeks. The Endurance, now a prisoner of the ice, drifted slowly with the pack as winds pushed the frozen sea westward. Shackleton ordered the men to carry on as normally as possible. They exercised the dogs, played soccer on the ice, and even held races to keep morale high. Frank Hurley took photographs of it all, scenes of men laughing on a surface that might crush them at any moment. "If we must die out here, at least the world will see how we lived." As winter deepened, the pressure of the ice on the ship grew unbearable. The floes shifted and ground together, splintering with the sound of distant cannon fire. One night in February, the crew awoke to terrifying groans and cracks as the Endurance's timbers strained under the pressure. "She's talking to us, boys, and I don't like what she's saying." But the ship held, for now. Through it all, Shackleton remained calm, almost unnaturally so. He visited each man daily, shared jokes, encouraged sports on the ice, and forbade despair. "We must all do our part. Work, eat, play, sleep. Morale is as vital as food or fuel. Keep cheerful, keep busy." His leadership kept panic at bay. The men believed in him because he refused to give up. By May, the sun vanished below the horizon for the Antarctic winter. Darkness swallowed the world. Temperatures plunged to -30 degrees Celsius. Inside the ship, men read books, played cards, and wrote diaries by flickering oil lamps. Outside, the wind shrieked like a banshee across the frozen wasteland. Endless night, endless cold. We wait for the thaw or for death, whichever comes first. The Endurance had become their home, their prison, and soon their tomb. As the ice tightened its grip, the ship's fate and the men's lives hung by a thread. What happened next would test them in ways no one could have imagined. September 1915. For nearly 9 months, the Endurance had been frozen in place, drifting slowly westward with the pack ice. The men had grown accustomed to the groans and cracks of the shifting floes, to the endless cold, to the long darkness of the Antarctic winter. But now, the ice was moving again. With spring came rising pressure, unstoppable, merciless, and soon to be deadly. On the morning of October 24th, a deafening crack split the air. The floes around Endurance surged together with crushing force. The ship shuddered violently, timbers snapping like gunfire. She's groaning like a living thing. Lord help us, she won't stand much more. The men rushed on deck. Ice ridges as tall as houses heaved up around the vessel. The Endurance tilted, trapped in a vise of solid ice grinding in slow motion. Shackleton, calm as ever, surveyed the chaos. The Endurance was mortally wounded. Her hull had begun to splinter. Water seeped below decks. Prepare to abandon ship. Get the sledges, the lifeboats, the stores. We save what we can. It was a moment no sailor wished for. The Endurance had been their home, their lifeline. Now she was doomed. For 2 days, the men fought to save the ship. They pumped water from the flooding holds, patched leaks with canvas and wood, and hacked at the ice, imprisoning her sides. But the pressure only increased. Each groan of the timbers sounded like the death cry of a living creature. "She's finished, sir. Nothing on God's earth can hold against this." On October 27th, Shackleton made the final call. Abandon ship, every man and dog to the ice. The men set up camp on the drifting floes, naming it Ocean Camp. From here they watched helplessly as their ship, their only refuge, slowly died. Frank Hurley risked his life to retrieve his photographic plates from the sinking vessel, wading through freezing water inside the tilting hull to save the expedition's story. These images, they'll outlive us all. People must see what happened here. On November 21st, 1915, the Endurance gave one last shudder. Her stern rose high. Her bow slipped under the ice-choked water, and with a groan like a dying animal, she was gone. She's gone. God help us, she's gone. The men stood in silence, the bitter wind whipping their beards, watching the last of her masts vanish beneath the ice, everything familiar gone in seconds. Shackleton gathered the men. They were now stranded on drifting ice, hundreds of miles from land, thousands from help, with no radio, no hope of rescue. And yet, he radiated calm. "Ship and stores have gone, so now we go home." Not a word about despair, not a flicker of panic. The goal was clear: survival. Through November and December, the men lived on the drifting ice floes. They built shelters from salvaged canvas and wood, slept in reindeer skin sleeping bags, hunted seals and penguins for food. The sled dogs became companions as well as workers, their howls echoing across the empty wastes. We live like castaways on a floating graveyard, waiting for the ice to crack beneath us. Weeks passed. The ice floe carried them farther north, but not towards safety. Shackleton studied maps, planned routes, and waited for the moment when the ice would finally break enough for them to launch the lifeboats. When the time comes, we make for the nearest land. Until then, we endure. The Endurance was gone, swallowed by the Antarctic. Ahead lay only uncertainty, hunger, and bitter cold. But Shackleton's men still lived, and as long as they lived, there was hope. What came next would push them to the edge of human endurance itself. January 1916. The Endurance was gone. The men had survived months on drifting ice, but the ice was no longer safe. The floes had begun to fracture and break apart, threatening to swallow them into the frigid Weddell Sea. Shackleton made the decision. Lifeboats would carry them to land, the nearest safe haven. Elephant Island, a barren, windswept rock hundreds of miles away. The men salvaged everything they could from the wrecked ship: rations, sledges, tents, axes, and even a few cherished possessions. The lifeboats, James Caird, Dudley Docker, and Stancomb Wills, were small, open, and fragile against the icy waves. Every man will row, steer, bail, and fight for life. Keep close, trust each other, and remember, no one will be left behind. Every man understood. In these waters, one mistake could mean death. The sea was cold enough to kill in minutes. On April 9, 1916, the men launched the lifeboats. The ice cracked and groaned around them as they pushed off into open water. For the first time in months, they were moving, but not towards safety, only toward a battle with the elements. Water like knives, wind like hammers. Every moment is a struggle, and yet the men row on, faces set against the storm. The James Caird and her companions pitched violently on the waves. Water splashed overboard, drenching the men to the bone. Every hour, exhaustion grew heavier. Rations were meager: hardtack biscuits, a few tins of pemmican, an occasional penguin or seal caught along the way. Frostbite and hypothermia were constant threats. Men's hands turned black and purple, lips cracked, eyes rimmed with fatigue. I never thought I'd feel cold this deep in my bones, and still, we row. Still we hope. The men took turns bailing water, rowing in shifts, and checking the small sails to keep moving forward. Even in the worst weather, Shackleton refused to allow despair. Days passed. Storms battered the boats with relentless ferocity. Waves taller than the lifeboats themselves crashed over the decks, threatening to capsize them. One particularly violent gale pitched the James Caird sideways, nearly filling her with icy water. Every man's strength was tested to the limit. "Hold her steady! Keep rowing! Trust the boat and trust each other!" Even in these conditions, the men's camaraderie held. They sang quietly, joked when they could, and shared small acts of kindness to sustain morale. Days turned to weeks. Fresh food was scarce. Scurvy began to take hold. Weakness and bleeding gums threatened men's ability to row, yet every man persevered. We rationed our vitamin rations as carefully as bullets in a battle. One bite too few, one day too long without meat, it could cost us a man. Each day became a test of endurance: rowing, bailing, navigating, and surviving. No one faltered, because in Shackleton's eyes, hesitation meant death. Midway through the journey, the Dudley Docker almost capsized in a rogue wave. The men clung to ropes, terrified, as icy water poured over them. Shackleton himself risked being thrown overboard. "Row! Don't let her turn! Keep her on course! Keep alive!" The men's unity saved them. With every ounce of strength, they righted the boat and continued. The sea had not yet claimed them. Captain Worsley navigated almost entirely by dead reckoning and celestial sightings. With no maps for the drifting ice and no compass reliable through magnetic interference, he became their lifeline. Every sight through the sextant is a prayer. Every calculation, a hope. One misstep, and we vanish into the sea. His skill kept them on course toward Elephant Island, though the land remained invisible for weeks, a distant hope at the edge of the horizon. Finally, after 7 days of unrelenting struggle, a jagged line appeared on the horizon. Elephant Island, a bleak, snow-covered rock, inhospitable but alive, stood before them. "Land, we live, we're alive." They rowed with the last of their strength, muscles screaming, bodies frozen, until they finally reached the rocky shore. The men set up camp on the harsh, rocky terrain. There was little shelter, barely enough food, and no hope of immediate rescue. Still, they survived. Shackleton's leadership and the men's unbroken spirit kept them alive. "We've come this far. Rest, eat, and prepare. One day we'll be rescued. Until then, we endure." Against impossible odds, Shackleton and his men had survived the ocean journey. 7 days of waves, wind, and ice had brought them to Elephant Island, a barren sanctuary at the edge of the world. Yet the ordeal was far from over. Only Shackleton himself, with a handful of men aboard the James Caird, could hope to reach South Georgia and summon rescue. The ultimate test of courage, endurance, and human will was about to begin. April 24, 1916. Shackleton knew that Elephant Island offered no hope of rescue. Ships rarely sailed these waters. The island was a frozen, isolated outpost in the vast Southern Ocean. The only chance of saving the men was to attempt the unthinkable, a voyage of 800 miles across one of the stormiest, most treacherous seas on the planet, in a lifeboat no longer than 22 feet, exposed to the elements. 5 men volunteered to join Shackleton aboard the James Caird, navigator Frank Worsley, ship's carpenter Harry McNish, seaman Thomas Crean, cook Henry McNish, and the young stowaway Perce Blackborough. Together they embarked on what would become one of the greatest survival feats in history. The boat was reinforced with wood salvaged from the wrecked Endurance, canvas tarpaulins lashed for shelter, and minimal provisions, a few tins of pemmican, biscuits, a small supply of water, and navigation instruments. If this rickety thing goes down, it'll be the end of us all. Better a rickety boat than no boat at all. We leave at first light. Every man knew that survival would demand more than skill. It would demand courage, endurance, and absolute trust in one another. The James Caird was pushed into the icy sea. From the start, the journey was brutal. Waves taller than the boat itself broke over the deck. Freezing water drenched the men, and wind tore at every rope and sail. The boat pitches like a leaf in a gale. The men are frozen to the bone, but there is no turning back. The first night was terrifying. Visibility was near zero. The waves thundered against the hull, threatening to capsize them. Every hour demanded constant bailing, rowing, and vigilance. Frank Worsley, the captain and navigator, relied on the stars to chart their course. With no visible landmarks, no compass reliable near the magnetic south, and waves tossing them like driftwood, navigation became a desperate art. Every sight, a prayer. Every calculation, a hope. One misstep, and we vanish into the Southern Ocean. Even under these impossible conditions, Worsley's skill kept them on course. The men trusted him with their lives, and rightly so. Days turned to weeks. Rations were limited. Hunger gnawed at every man. Water was rationed to a few mouthfuls per day, and frostbite began to claim fingers, toes, and noses. My hands, I can't feel them. I fear I will lose them. Perce Blackborough eventually developed severe frostbite and had to be cared for by the others. The physical toll was unimaginable. A week into the voyage, a storm struck. The James Caird was tossed on monstrous waves for 36 hours straight. Water flooded the boat repeatedly. Every man feared the worst. Hold fast. Keep the boat on course. Row until your arms fall off. Men's faces were blue with cold, muscles screaming, yet they rowed tirelessly. Even McNish, the surly carpenter, admitted later that survival depended on Shackleton's unbreakable will. During brief lulls in the storm, the men glimpsed distant icebergs, both hope and threat. Every wave could smash them, every moment without navigation could send them off course. If we can just make landfall, the men on Elephant Island will be saved. Exhaustion and despair fought against hope at every turn, yet Shackleton's presence inspired courage. He rowed, bailed, and encouraged the men, refusing to let fear take hold. As they approached South Georgia, the sea became a labyrinth of icebergs, frozen ridges, and hidden shoals. Every sighting could mean salvation or death. The charts are only a guide. Ice moves every hour. One wrong turn and we are lost. The men carefully threaded their way through the maze, steering between massive icebergs while the wind threatened to push them into danger. Weeks passed. Food ran perilously low. Men ate biscuits and pemmican in tiny bites, conserving energy. Their bodies were emaciated, muscles wasting, yet every man understood. Survival depended on reaching South Georgia. Every day is a battle against the cold, the waves, and my own weakness. But we press on, because to give up is to die. Even the strongest men grew weak. Yet the bond between them, forged in months on the ice, kept them alive. On May 8th, after 16 grueling days at sea, South Georgia's jagged peaks appeared on the horizon. Relief washed over the men, mixed with fear. Landing would still require navigating treacherous surf and hidden rocks. Land, we made it, we're alive. They rowed with every ounce of strength remaining. Shackleton's leadership, Worsley's navigation, and the men's unbreakable resolve had brought them to safety, almost. The boat struck rocks, pitching violently. Shackleton and Crean waded ashore first, helping the others climb out. Every step was agony, muscles screaming, frostbite burning, but they had reached solid ground. We made it, but the men on Elephant Island still wait. This journey is only the beginning. Exhausted, half-frozen and starving, the 6 men had completed a feat that would be remembered for generations: 16 days, 800 miles, in one of the deadliest seas on Earth. Shackleton had conquered the sea, but the journey was not over. The remaining men on Elephant Island depended on him. Now, he would organize a crossing of South Georgia on foot, a glacier-covered interior never before traversed, to reach the whaling stations and rescue them. Human courage, skill, and endurance had achieved the impossible, but one last test remained. May 20th, 1916. Shackleton, Worsley, and Crean had survived the 800-mile open-sea voyage aboard the James Caird. But salvation was still out of reach. The whaling stations of South Georgia lay on the opposite side of the island, over 50 miles of mountainous glacial terrain never before crossed. Maps were rough and incomplete. They had no climbing equipment beyond a few ropes, ice axes, and determination. The mountains were higher than any they had climbed, glaciers deeper than any they had traversed. One wrong step could mean death. The men landed at King Haakon Bay, exhausted, frostbitten, and nearly frozen. Yet Shackleton wasted no time. With only 3 men and no provisions for a multi-day trek, they began the ascent into the unknown. There is no time to rest. The men on Elephant Island depend on us. We cross this land, or they die. Every step was agony. Loose scree, snowfields, and icy rivers slowed their progress. The men had to climb cliffs by hand and use ropes to navigate crevasses hidden by snow. They entered the heart of South Georgia's glaciers. Crevasses yawned, like chasms of death, beneath the thin snow bridges. Each step required careful testing. A single misstep could plunge them into a freezing abyss. Test every step. If one of us falls, none of us survive. The men moved slowly, inch by inch, sometimes dragging each other across treacherous ice. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the cracking of ice and their own heavy breathing. Rations were nearly gone. Each man had a small biscuit and a few mouthfuls of water per day. Frostbite gnawed at fingers, toes, and noses. Shackleton himself suffered numbness in his feet, but pushed on relentlessly. My legs burn with fatigue, fingers are black, lips cracked. Yet I rode, climbed, and will continue. There is no other choice. They rationed strength carefully. One day of overexertion could cost them the entire journey. The terrain worsened. They descended into valleys of loose rocks and ice, ascended near vertical cliffs, and crossed rivers swollen by glacial melt. Each river crossing was a gamble. The icy currents threatened to sweep them away. Use the rope, test the stones. One misstep and we are lost. Move carefully. They relied on experience, courage, and instinct. Every decision was a matter of life and death. After days of relentless climbing and crossing, morale began to fray. Each man battled not just the terrain but fatigue, hunger, and doubt. Look at me. Step by step, we will reach Stromness. The men on Elephant Island are alive because we endure. Keep moving. Despite pain and exhaustion, Shackleton's leadership kept the men focused. The promise of rescue pushed them forward. South Georgia was largely uncharted. Shackleton relied on sketches, rough maps from whalers, and the stars for orientation. One wrong turn could trap them in glaciers for days, or end in disaster. The streams, the peaks, they do not match the map. We move by instinct now. We keep west and downhill toward Stromness. They climbed over 9,000-foot peaks, descended into hidden valleys, and skirted glacier crests. Hours could pass without seeing any sign of the coastline. Night brought new dangers. Temperatures dropped sharply. They slept huddled under rocks and tarps, trying to conserve heat. The wind howled through the mountains, threatening to blow them off cliffs. I cannot sleep. The cold bites too deep. Rest when you can. Tomorrow we move again. One step, always forward. After 6 grueling days, they glimpsed signs of human activity. The whaling station chimneys, boats tied at docks, and smoke rising into the mountains. Hope surged through them. Stromness, we are saved. Now we bring help. Every ounce of remaining energy was used to descend the final cliffs and cross the valleys to the station. On May 20th, Shackleton, Worsley, and Crean arrived at Stromness whaling station. They were emaciated, frostbitten, and near collapse, but alive. "We must rescue the men on Elephant Island immediately. Lives depend on it." The station workers provided food, shelter, and a small ship. Shackleton's courage, determination, and the men's endurance had made the impossible possible. Within days, Shackleton secured a whaleboat and began planning the rescue of the remaining men stranded on Elephant Island. Ice, weather, and limited supplies meant every decision was critical. "Elephant Island is our goal. Every man will return. We leave no one behind." Shackleton's journey across South Georgia had secured their survival. But the final chapter awaited. The men on Elephant Island had endured months of cold, hunger, and isolation, and their rescue was still uncertain. Shackleton had crossed uncharted mountains, glaciers, and rivers, an achievement almost unimaginable. But the story was not yet over. The men left on Elephant Island still needed him. Through courage, leadership, and endurance, one man had accomplished what many thought impossible. Now he would return to rescue his crew, completing the epic tale of the Endurance. May 1916. Shackleton had crossed South Georgia and reached Stromness whaling station. But his work was far from over. 22 men remained stranded on Elephant Island, battered by wind, ice, and hunger. Every passing day brought danger. Supplies were low, storms threatened, and time was running out. Shackleton knew the stakes. Failure meant death for his entire crew. Shackleton arranged for a small whaling vessel, the Yelcho, to attempt the rescue, but the Weddell Sea was a treacherous obstacle. Icebergs, pack ice, and violent storms made the voyage nearly impossible. "We have come this far. There is no turning back. Every man will be brought home." Provisions were packed, routes charted, and the men aboard the Yelcho knew the risk, but they trusted Shackleton's leadership implicitly. The first attempt to reach Elephant Island failed. The ice was too thick, waves too high. Shackleton returned, frustrated but undeterred. Every failed attempt brought him closer to the edge of hope, and closer to exhaustion. "The ice refuses to yield, but we will try again. We leave no man behind." Despite setbacks, Shackleton's resolve never faltered. He knew that the men on Elephant Island depended on him, and he would not fail them. Finally, on August 30th, 1916, Shackleton and the crew aboard the Yelcho found a break in the ice. They carefully threaded their way toward the northern shore of Elephant Island. Every wave, every ice floe could mean disaster. "Steady! Keep her on course. Every man waits for us." After hours of tense navigation, the rugged coastline of Elephant Island came into view. Shackleton's heart soared. He was about to reunite with the men he had led through unimaginable trials. The stranded men watched from the rocky shore, ragged and frostbitten. As the small vessel drew near, hope surged, then relief, then joy. "They've come! They've come for us!" Shackleton stepped ashore, embracing each man. Some wept, some laughed, all of them overwhelmed by the knowledge that they had survived against the most extreme odds imaginable. With care and precision, Shackleton organized the evacuation. Every man, every dog, every bit of equipment was loaded onto the small vessel. The journey back to Stromness was harrowing, but this time, their courage was bolstered by the certainty of rescue. "Hold fast! Together we row, we sail, we endure until home." Storms still threatened. Ice floes still blocked passages, but nothing could break the men's spirit. Each wave they overcame was a victory. Each mile sailed a triumph of human will. After a tense and treacherous journey, Shackleton and his men returned to Stromness. Supplies were replenished, wounds tended, and warm food awaited. But more importantly, the crew of the Endurance was alive. "We have done it. Every man survives. We leave no one behind." The men of the expedition, who had endured months of frozen isolation, starvation, and near-death experiences, could finally rest. The Endurance expedition is remembered not for the ship's loss, but for the unbreakable spirit of its men and the extraordinary leadership of Sir Ernest Shackleton. Against impossible odds, he inspired loyalty, courage, and hope. He proved that survival in the most extreme conditions is possible with determination, teamwork, and vision. A great ship is nothing without her crew. We endured because we endured together. The story of the endurance has inspired generations. Not a single life was lost after the ship sank, a testament to courage, resourcefulness, and unyielding human spirit. From drifting on ice floes to crossing oceans and glaciers, Shackleton and his men faced one peril after another, yet they survived, their tale echoing as a beacon of endurance and hope. The Endurance Expedition reminds us that true courage is measured not by the absence of fear, but by the resolve to continue in its face. Shackleton's journey, the survival of his men, and their unbroken spirit endure as one of history's greatest tales of exploration and human resilience. Thank you for watching this story of survival, leadership, and endurance. Sir Ernest Shackleton and his crew faced the unimaginable and survived together. If you enjoyed this documentary, please subscribe and follow for more incredible stories of adventure, survival, and exploration.